I'm Matt Reynolds, and this is my podcast.
I can do the job, but running the business is quite difficult. What a lot of tradesmen lack, and I was probably one of them, is business skills.
I don't mind making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes.
Information is all around you in the minds of people that work beside you.
Welcome back to the Trench Talk podcast. I'm your host, Matt Reynolds, and my guest for this episode is Rob Gell. Rob is a coastal geomorphologist by training. He taught environmental science and physical geography at Melbourne State College and Melbourne University, then for 31 years presented television weather. He is also a keynote speaker and the MC for the 2019 World Plumbing Conference. The idea of these discussions, for those of you joining us for the first time, is to go into the trenches of achievement and talk not with people who are orchestrating from some lofty perspective, but to those high performers who are actually in the trenches honing their craft. That has included guests from the worlds of business, sport and entertainment, all of whom are on the front lines doing amazing things. Rob has extensive experience in environmental communications and marketing, business strategy and sustainable development project design, responding to the need for businesses to be informed about new issues and actively develop plans and programs to ensure an understanding of changing markets, the emerging green economy and the need for a positive and accountable contribution of all stakeholders. Rob is a director at ReThink Sustainability and at water tank supply company GreenCo Water. He is also a published author and photographer. Rob is a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, an inaugural fellow of the Environmental Institute of Australia and New Zealand, and a member of the Council of the Royal Society of Victoria. He was a member of the Victorian Coastal Council for 17 years and was the Environmental Ambassador to the Melbourne 2006 Commonwealth Games. He is also the patron of the Geography Teachers Association of Victoria, Wildlife Victoria and Life Education Victoria. He's a Life Ambassador for Australia Day. On Australia Day in 2014, Rob was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia in recognition for his service to conservation, to the protection of coastal and marine environments and to the community. Within this conversation, you'll hear a ton of business ideas and opportunities. The world is changing quickly and we have crossed the cost barrier for many sustainable solutions. Society is embracing the sustainable approach and businesses are investing to protect their brands and to save money. We also covered global warming, building products like concrete and steel, creating large carbon footprints, and the somewhat surprising, at least for me, products that could replace them. Many sustainable technologies, including electric and hydrogen-powered cars, making money and reducing waste, sustainability in relation to becoming an employer of choice, examples of businesses and towns embracing new technologies like the use of hydrogen gas, making correct, sustainable and environmental choices, the cheapest way of generating electricity, Rob's career presenting television weather, and as always, much, much more. To connect with Rob, head to rethinksustainability.com.au. His Twitter handle is @RobGell, and you'll find him pretty easily using the search function on both Facebook and LinkedIn. If you enjoy Trench Talk, head to xrm.com.au/podcast and opt in for the newsletter. We'll make sure you're notified when every new episode of the show is released. Trench Talk is available everywhere good podcasts are served, so if you're feeling super nice and want to support the show, please leave a review, comment, rating, or whatever your chosen podcast platform allows. Enjoy my chat with Rob Gell. Rob, thanks for doing this.
It's a pleasure, Matt. I don't do much interviewing anymore. I do a little bit of public speaking and stuff, but it takes me back a while, so it's a pleasure.
So we're in your offices in the CBD in Melbourne this morning, so thank you first of all for having me in. You have an extensive resume and you have worn a number of caps over the years, so I thought we might start with what you're currently doing and how you currently spend your time.
I'm a director of a company called ReThink Sustainability. It's a relatively new company, although I've had a range of environmental consultancies really since the early 1990s. ReThink Sustainability focuses, we call ourselves a sustainability advisory business. We're out of office this coming Friday. We're thinking about calling ourselves a sustainability resultancy rather than a consultancy. So I say to my much younger business partners, I don't want to work with companies who want more strategies, goals and plans. I want targets. We know what to do. How much money do you have to spend? You got 20 grand, you got 50, you got more. I'll tell you what to do and you'll feel good about doing it. So At my age, I'm a bit sick of sort of saying, well, let's have a think about that and work out what we're going to do. We actually know what to do to make the world a better place. So I'm really enjoying my time here working with David and Justin as my prime partners. We're doing a lot of really interesting work.
And if you've got an example of a project you're maybe currently working on or just completed?
Our little showcase project at present is Millua Cheese in northeastern Victoria. I happen to know the owner, or have done for 40 years or so, and I've enjoyed eating his cheese too. He was being peppered with requests, hey, can we come and look at your cheese factory and put some solar on the roof? And we're at a lunch actually. And he said, look, is this an okay thing to do? I said, it is, but it's part of a process. Don't just go and put solar on your roof without checking out a whole bunch of other things. So he said, well, if anyone's going to put solar on my roof, it might as well be my mate. So what do you want to do? So we started the process and we looked at his demand. So we firstly recontracted him. We use a company that does virtually a reverse auction on an energy contract. We're doing that with big companies as well. So they just look at, so it's a free service. So this is important for anyone listening. It's a free service. There's no compunction. Don't have to take up the offer that you might get. It's retailer agnostic. It simply takes your contract, puts it to the market and says, bid on that, guys, give it your best shot.
Yep.
So we saved a company last week. That's a relatively big company. We saved them 85 grand.
Okay.
We did
Was that an ongoing basis? Annual basis? Okay,
yeah, so they're spending a bit. Pizzini Winery up in northeastern King Valley, they spend about, I think, 79,000. We saved them 19 grand.
Okay.
Often we can save 30%. So that's the first thing. So you just reduce your cost on what you got.
Yep.
The second thing is to look at your demand. We use some really simple and the good thing about technology now, we do employ a fair bit of technology, and David, our CEO, comes from the digital world, so we're moving into the digital space as well. So we put in some electricity monitoring technology. Cost about $1,500 to get does 80% of what a $140,000 building management system will do, and we just saw where the use was. We changed all his lights to LED. We put variable speed drives on his compressors. We changed his boilers to CO2 heat pumps, and a couple of other things which I can't remember. And then put 100 kilowatts of solar on his roof. Borrowed $250,000 for him through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation over 10 years, yep. Which means he was revenue positive from day one, and we saved him 72.8% of his energy budget.
All that's pretty achievable pretty quickly these days. It's not revolutionary in terms of pushing the boundaries of new technology. Yeah. It's, what is it, more about recognising that these things are available? Yeah, I think so. And it's so really what I've described is a milestone project. It's a process. You've got to go one, this follows that, follows the other thing. Yeah. So you reduce your demand first. I mean, what's the point in buying, if he had bought 250 kilowatts of solar and then reduced his demand, he doesn't need all the solar. So you actually match what you need to generate to what your new lower demand is. Yes. Is a simple thing. For most small businesses, and this is really a small to medium-sized business, owners and managers really haven't got time to think about it. And they don't know where to go. It's a mixed marketplace. We're getting lots of contrary messages from leading politicians that we shouldn't be getting about. There is almost no discussion about energy efficiency. It's all about, if it's not coal and oil, what's it going to be? Will it be nuclear? No. Will it be solar? Will it be wind? And what is not well understood is that the new energy systems, or the new world of energy, will be a distributed system of everything. Everything that's available as fast as possible is what we have to do if we're even going to consider getting to keeping below not only the Paris plus 2 degrees target by 2030-ish, but if we've now got a new target, it seems, of only plus 1.5, which scientists have been saying for 20 years anyway. So it's everything we possibly can do as fast as possible. And distributed, do you mean that we share the renewable energy that we create? Is that what you mean by that? Partly, but it's also it's the whole thing. So rather than having, for Victoria, we get our electricity from the Latrobe Valley. No, we don't. We'll get our electricity from residential rooftops. We'll get from solar. We'll have commercial rooftops with solar. We're now talking about virtual power plants where a precinct can share energy or take it to the market. We'll have
gas peaking plants placed in the suburbs. But I remember I sat on a consultation committee for SP AusNet, it was called at the time, now AusNet Services, and we were talking about the impact of bushfire on their network. Every time we'd had big fires in the Alps in, I'm thinking 2006, and big northeastern fires 2 years earlier, and they found that every time after the fire period, there's sort of period of light rain, all of the high tension cables have got dust and ash sitting on them. The first thing that happens once you wet that, they arc out and they turn off about 300,000 houses in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, wreck their contract and get fined heavily. Yeah. So we're saying, look, all this business, you've got this overground wires distributing electricity. What's it going to cost you to put it all underground to avoid that risk? And they furtively looked around the room and they came back and said, I think the number was something like $41 billion. So what's the plan? You're already telling me that with the frequency of bushfires we have now, they actually said it's cheaper, Rob, rather than to put the power lines underground, it's cheaper to put gas peaking plants in the suburbs to match residential solar. So they're already telling me on the frequency of bushfires in the first decade of this millennium that it's cheaper to not take electricity from Latrobe Valley with a 27% loss bringing it to Melbourne anyway.
Yep.
It's cheaper to go to gas peaking plants to match residential solar. That's over a decade ago. So this is the change system. So this is generating at a range of places. So we've now got a big new solar farm at Numurkah. We've got Australia's biggest wind farm down in the southwest. We're probably going to get Australia's first offshore wind farm off the Gippy Lakes. It's called Star of the Sea, I think, 270 huge turbines. So we're starting to change the places where the energy is generated. Mm-hmm. It's going to come in a range of different forms. We're not doing much biomass energy in Victoria, but there certainly are in Queensland. And the thing that's coming after that is going to be hydrogen from solar or hydrogen from wind. And whether you then distribute it within a little network, within a microgrid at the site, yep, to your local area in a closed system, but within a bigger network, that's all coming. So the weak link in the chain currently is the wires, despite the fact we spent a fortune on them.
Because it reminds me of kind of like cloud computing, right? You want to have all these little things set up in lots of different places, but you want them replicated, you want them connected. So if one goes down, you have no loss of, well, in this case, power.
Yeah, that's right.
Cloud.
So it becomes a complex system, which is very resilient, yeah, and also it is much, much more efficient. Now, the interesting thing as far as your sort of fraternity is, and I mentioned briefly hydrogen, Milawa, as it turns out, is actually exploring, or there's a group, includes AusNet Services, Deakin University, CSIRO and a couple of others, to take the township of Milawa off-grid on hydrogen.
And has that happened?
No. But it's in design, or people are thinking of looking at it as an opportunity. Because part of the work that we did with Milawa Cheese, Dave Brown, the owner, said, well, look, I've got a paddock over there. It's about 100 acres. You can have that if you like. So we said, all right, well, let's look at putting a big solar field in there. Because his 100 kilowatts is sort of panels on his roof. He's paying that off in 1.8 years. He's getting charged so much for electricity and he's got so much sunshine. He's paying it off in no time.
Yes.
So I thought, oh, that's all right. Why wouldn't we put a large-scale solar facility on his 100 acres that he just uses for, I don't know, something, and produce a whole lot more electricity for the township or whatever. Anyway, we actually can't get into the high-tension wires that are going over the top of the township. They're already full. They're bringing energy out of Bogong and the Snowy, right? So you can't get into those wires.
You can't access the network. Yep.
So what else can you do? How do we do this? So the potential is to take a township like Milawa, use solar energy to hydrolyse water, produce hydrogen in the township, put the hydrogen into the reticulated gas supply within the township, and it mixes, well, sort of mixes. Then you just re-extract it at the end. They said natural gas and hydrogen separate quite easily. Yes. And you can either use it directly to put it in your gas stove and burn it for heat, or you can put it into a fuel cell and create electricity.
So does it burn exactly, and I'm a bit naive with the hydrogen thing, to be honest, does it burn exactly the same as natural gas? Because to put two gases in the one pipe, to me, kind of, first of all...
you would separate them. You can put them in the same pipe and then they separate. You separate the gases.
Okay, I misunderstood what you said. I thought you were saying they mix in the same pipe.
Well, Yes, and I don't know enough about that.
Okay.
But I know you then quite easily separate them at the end of the pipe.
Yep.
For whatever purpose. And I also don't know about the burning qualities of hydrogen compared to natural gas, so don't ask me that question either.
No, mate, that was going to be my question, not the quality, but whether, I mean, I know, as a plumber and working with gas stuff, that if you change gases like LPG to natural, you need to change injectors and burner sizes and all this sort of stuff, in many cases, to have an efficient appliance. So I'm assuming that there must be, well, that could be a big opportunity for work, right?
Absolutely. I'm sure the energy transition is on big time.
Yep.
Big time. Unfortunately, there are a few Australian parliamentarians who understand that. It is now unstoppable.
Yes.
Neither Barnaby Joyce or Matt Canavan or Angus Taylor can stop it. It's already happening.
Yep.
So just on the hydrogen thing, for example, there are two projects in northwestern Australia. One that CSIRO, I know, is working with Siemens. And I was sitting at a breakfast a couple of years ago, and they had the Chief Technology Officer of Siemens out here talking to the acting head of CSIRO Energy, and they were talking about building a solar farm in the Pilbara, half the size of Tasmania. That's the size of Denmark.
My goodness, so that's big.
That's big. Because CSIRO has just, and Larry Marshall, the head of CSIRO, was on Q&A 2 months ago. CSIRO have just built a device which is effectively a metal membrane which you can use to... So the ideal way to transport hydrogen is as ammonia. So H2, hydrogen, ammonia, NH3. You can take ammonia and push it through this metal membrane and re-extract the hydrogen, right? Very cool technology. The first in the world, which you'd expect from CSIRO. So their proposal is to work with Siemens. They're going to hydrolyse water up in the Pilbara, produce hydrogen, transport it as ammonia to Southeast Asia, and redesign the energy economy of Southeast Asia.
Because one of the big advantages of this type of gas is that there's no... Like, batteries can go flat over time, right, if you try and store energy in a battery. If I understand this correctly, there's next to no loss.
There's no loss. Yeah.
Okay, so this becomes very attractive because it can be, well, moved efficiently if it needs to be, right?
And no losses. Yeah, so, for example, we're talking to an Israeli company now that wants to bring into Australia fuel cell generators that would replace diesel generators.
Okay.
Right, so for Telstra, for example, that's got about 4,000 little sheds around the country pushing out signal to we can all run our mobile phones.
Yes.
But all running on diesel.
Oh, wow.
Right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I never looked into it, but I
they're
didn't
either
know.
on the network, but they've got backup diesel or whatever.
Yep.
You'd replace them with fuel cells, store the hydrogen would just sit there, no losses,
Yes.
no emissions, and very, very efficient. So this big energy transformation is absolutely underway.
If I understand this correctly, the reason for that is, rightly or wrongly, two things, right? Money and convenience, because until it becomes easier and cheaper, it's going to be somewhat difficult, I'm assuming, to convince people, maybe looking at just at the numbers, to actually do it. But we've now crossed that barrier in a lot of these areas.
Wind is cheapest of all. You can't build a coal-fired power station and compete with wind in Australia anymore. I think they're $45 a megawatt hour they're bidding at. I mean, you can't get coal to the market for that sort of price. Solar's price is dropping all the time as well. Mm-hmm. Plus, there's the convenience. You can actually put it near where you need to be. And the wind and solar resources are free once you're established.
Yes.
Right? You have to continue to pay for the coal. Yep. So that market is changing fundamentally. And it's fascinating also not to go into too far, but to understand, I had a meeting with a member of the Minerals Council of Australia just last week. And the Minerals Council is now pushing nuclear, and probably the fourth generation nuclear is very clean. We haven't got an example anywhere. Yep. It's very expensive, and it'll take a lot of time and a lot of energy to set up, a lot of embedded energy in setting up a nuclear power station as well. But now it's interesting that the nuclear lobby is calling for a carbon price so they can get to market to compete against cheaper forms of energy.
Okay.
You say, well, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Now that we've got hydrogen, I mean, Australia's got the best solar potential of any continent on the planet.
I've heard that several times.
Yeah, so, why wouldn't we just be making hydrogen, A, to export, but also to use locally and store our energy in highly efficient batteries For, as Matt Canavan says, when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, it doesn't matter. You've got it stored as hydrogen.
I had a discussion about this with someone yesterday, and that seems to be an area of contention, something we always think about, right? Like the sun goes down to our lights go off. We need the storing capabilities, but what you're saying is that you can convert these things into hydrogen, you have no loss at all, which solves that problem. So what's the plan?
An infinite fuel source.
Of course, yeah.
And now the technology to convert it as a transportable fuel, or you use it in situ where you've produced it.
So how do we transition completely away from coal?
Well, just go ahead and do it. So if we come to, and this is something I do want to say, take this opportunity to say, we are facing, and this is the thing that's not discussed in the debate in Australia, we actually have a fundamental problem that the climate is changing very rapidly now and is changing faster than it was a decade ago. So the curve's going up. It's not a straight line. And we need to turn that warming curve down very rapidly. And that's an existential crisis. The parallel existential crisis is the collapse of global ecosystems. And it's not even discussed in Australia. I mean, we've now got 2 reports in the last 12 months, one from a group called, it's the IPBES, which I won't explain what that is, and the Worldwide Fund for Nature in October last year, basically saying we've currently got 1 million species at a risk of extinction, 25% of life on the planet. These are the animals and plants that provide us with the ecosystem services that underpin our economy. And until we understand that, we've got to have a massive reinvestment in habitat reconstruction and biodiversity conservation, and in fact we're reading a paper at present on the Victorian coast, new coastal policy, and these documents must look at net gain. We've actually got to turn the curve around on species loss as well. So there's 2 things. But if we come back to the climate one, if we're to keep to this target, which all the nations of the world agreed to keep global mean temperatures at less than 2 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures, to go back to the 1900s. Hans-Joachim Schellnhuber, who runs the Potsdam Institute in Germany, which is one of the top 3 or 4 of the leading climate organisations in the world, and this is the sort of the real world stuff. If we're going to stay under +2, we've got to do things immediately. We've got to start shutting down coal-fired power stations from today, even if they're good. We've got to close them down. We cannot afford to keep burning coal. We've got this decade or the coming decade to move from internal combustion engines to electric, to electrify everything. So, and this is where the transformation is underway. Volkswagen, probably the biggest car manufacturer in the world, they own just about everything. Their entire fleet will be electric by 2025.
Yeah.
Right? Volvo's entire fleet currently is either electric or hybrid.
Yep.
It's happening.
Yes.
So we need to electrify everything. So no more internal combustion engines burning oil. Now that's an issue in itself. We've actually got to generate a whole lot more electrical energy, but you can with hydrogen, and we've got a massive reinvestment in solar and wind, etc. Then from about 2030, we've got about a decade to get ready for this. We've got to stop building our cities out of cement and steel.
Yes, so I did read about this, and I had it down to ask you about it because it's actually the manufacturing of these products which it has one of the biggest detrimental effects on climate, our environment, right?
This is where our economic system is dumb to these critical issues. So I'm old enough now to have a granddaughter. She's 4 in September, and that, believe me, that changes the way you think about things. So I think about juniper at age 30, and I'm going, oh my God, that's 2050. What sort of a planet? And it really changes the way you think about things. So coming back to our economic system, for example, it is still cheaper for us in Australia to make an aluminium beer can from virgin materials than it is from recycled aluminium at a 16-fold energy cost.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Aluminium is virtually liquid electricity. It's incredibly energy hungry. That's why we built our, special cables from Latrobe Valley all the way to Portland.
Yes.
Couldn't think of a worse place to put it, further away from the energy source. So it uses massive amounts of electricity. So that's why recycling's a fundamental thing that we need to do. We need to recover those resources because effectively we can recover the energy that's embedded in the manufacture of them as well. But our economic system doesn't understand that. So steel and cement are also highly energy intensive products. So currently the manufacture of cement, and this is because there's a chemical reaction involved. It uses electricity to drive a chemical reaction, and it requires lots and lots of electricity to make cement from limestone. And currently, cement manufacture globally is at about 8% of global emissions. It's huge. So there's more emissions from the manufacture of cement than from ships and aeroplanes combined.
So you don't naturally, well, to me anyway, you might be different obviously with your position, but you don't naturally think about that, do you?
Yeah.
Like you naturally go to cars because you see the smog. You don't think about the buildings, rightly or wrongly.
Right,
So
yeah. So all these tilt slab concrete factories we're putting up all over Melbourne,
yeah.
they are a huge problem because the embedded energy in the manufacture of the materials is a problem. So that's why Schellnhuber will say from 2030 we've got to start, and steel's a problem as well. So we've actually got to think about making our cities again, he would say, out of timber, stone and clay. So cross-laminated timber,
Yeah.
which is just as strong, if not stronger than steel.
Okay.
So this is laminated beams,
Yeah.
stone, so hewn stone where you need it for whatever purpose, and clay, meaning bricks. So we're actually going to make bricks again from low energy manufacturing processes, and there are a number of them. There's an Australian company, the Melbourne company, that has awards from all over the world for manufacturing bricks. They worked out how to do this in kilns in India where black soot was a problem because people were using, burning whatever they could to make bricks to make little houses. Mm-hmm. They worked out how to make highly energy efficient brick kilns. But of course, we don't do that in Australia because we don't worry about the embedded energy cement. We do what we do. Yep. So these are the technologies that are coming. And if we're, for my granddaughter's sake, if we're going to keep the global temperature, and +2, I might say, is a recipe for disaster. I mean, that's a frightening number. We're already at +1, yes. And we're seeing a whole lot of changes in ecosystems. I mean, look at the United States today. They're going to their third day in excess of 105 or something like that for 2/3 of the country, and people are dying, as we've seen here. I mean, the impact, people don't understand. They say, oh, well, extra degree warmer. It's not the thermometer on your aircon at home.
Yeah.
It's actually, that's a global mean temperature, and it's frightening. So 1.5 is really, and 2 is certainly a recipe for disaster. So we have to do these things. And this is, we're going, oh, well, what did I hear yesterday? Oh, we can't afford to. Well, we can't afford not to.
Yes.
And the other point about all of this, and I'm reading some work on this on the weekend, I can't remember what it's in relation to, but almost everywhere you go, the cost of doing something now is less than the cost of doing nothing in the long run.
Yes. So this is quite an interesting mindset thing I've come across a few times. And I had a guy recently on the podcast named Rowan Sykes who survived a big workplace accident. And I asked him about the cost of safety. He said the thing about safety is you always pay for it.
Yep.
It's just when you pay for it. And I thought that at the time, that's such an intelligent way of processing this stuff. And it's naive now to think that we're not going to pay for this at some point, right? We can kick the can down the road, so to speak, for again and again and again, but eventually that compounds right into a price that we have to pay. And
the difficulty with climate change, anthropogenic global warming, we call it what it is. So it's anthropogenic, it's man-made.
Yes.
And there's no discussion about whether we're going into any cooling phase, despite what some other people have said recently. We are warming, and we have been warming for a while, mostly in the last 4 decades, really. The thing that people don't understand, and the economy doesn't understand this either, there's a lag effect in CO2. The warming potential of the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere now hasn't been realised yet.
The carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere and then it warms up after that.
Absolutely.
So there's a lag.
There's a lag effect.
Okay,
there's a lag effect. Now that CO2 could stay there for 100 years. So in other words, we could stop global emissions or take them to zero today,
but it continues,
and we're still going to warm.
Yeah, okay.
We're still locked in about 0.8 of a degree of warming on the CO2 that's in the atmosphere today.
Yep.
Now, the economists don't get that. They don't understand that fundamental bit of physics, which is the thing that really frightens me, because people say to me, "Oh, I don't know about." I don't believe it. Well, what don't you believe? Because we've been talking about this. There's a bloke called the mathematicians listening will be aware of a guy called Joseph Fourier, Frenchman, who in 1824 was looking at the ice ages and postulated that there were gases in the atmosphere that had a warming potential of the planet.
Okay.
Right? He understood the greenhouse effect. So he postulated. John Tyndall proved the greenhouse effect in his lab in about 1865.
Yep.
And then there was a bloke called Svante Arrhenius in 1896, Swedish Nobel chemist, who published in the Philosophical magazine, I've got a copy of it, that if you double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you're likely to increase the mean global temperature by 4 or 5 degrees.
That's quite a
Right.
lot.
So, well, that's what we're heading for.
Yep.
Right. So it's simple. It's physics.
Yes.
It's not about my belief.
Yep.
It's a bit of physics. So we actually have to seriously, and a lot of people who really understand this topic are talking about we need to actually physically take CO2 out of the atmosphere. We need to draw down. We've got to initiate projects actually now going to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. The obvious way to do that is more plants.
Yes.
More trees.
Yep.
And there are lots of other things. So you can take CO2 out of the atmosphere. Carbon capture and storage is one that's a possibility, but it's never been proved. We've spent an enormous amount of money on it, and if it leaks, stuff goes back in the atmosphere. We've actually got to do some other projects. We've got to get much more efficient. And this needs to be it's the war effort. I was talking about this 10 years ago. The effort we need is, the World War I war effort and the World War II war effort combined now.
To do good.
Yeah. Well, to stay under the globally recognised targets that we've all signed on to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've actually got a whole lot of work to do.
So what you're saying is right now is that we're not going to make those targets?
Not currently. We're heading for +3.
Okay. How is and I'm sure I can look this up, but how is the temperature actually measured? If you could explain that really quickly.
It's measured now at a range of sites around the world, and it's coupled with the way we measure carbon dioxide as well. And Australia's got some critical sites in recording both. We've pushed back our understanding of global temperatures, particularly by cores in Antarctica, where we can actually drill down and extract ice that we can date at in excess of 800,000 years. So you go down and find that ice, and in a lab, that ice is snowfall from 800,000 years ago, and it traps air when the snow falls. It traps air in the snow and protects it in bubbles in the ice, so it sits there. So you re-extract that air and analyse it and find out what the amount of CO2 was in the atmosphere. There's a whole bunch of other ways that we can identify temperature changes as well. Really only strongly since the late 1800s when we developed thermometers and stuff like that, but we can reconstruct back further. We've got a really strong CO2 record though now back. You can reconstruct it back to millions of years, and we can reconstruct temperature back to millions of years. So if we just put those things into a current day, when I was at school, there was 280 part per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So 0.028 ppm. Today it's 415 ppm, so 0.0415. We've increased the concentration of CO2 by 41%. So people say, there's not much CO2 in the atmosphere. Well, it's that little bit, if you've been watching Brian Cox talking about the planets lately and their atmospheres, we've only got 100 kilometres of atmosphere. It's really thin.
Yes.
But it's the CO2 that's in Earth's atmosphere now that's enabled life to evolve in the last, say, 10,000 years as we know it.
Yep.
Certainly to enable humans to evolve over the last 200,000 years or thereabouts.
Yep.
Venus, for example, has got 70% CO2 in the atmosphere and the temperature's 480.
Yeah, that's
right.
That's a bit warm. Yeah,
we know how this works.
Yes,
and Mars varies from about I'm guessing plus 86 to minus 220.
Okay, so I didn't quite understand that. So you can run that. What you just said is you can run this against different planets and and work out or forecast what is likely to happen here.
So we call Earth the Goldilocks planet. It's just right.
Okay.
Right, so we've just got the right amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. It's kept our global temperature at around about 15 degrees. Average. So, but we've increased that now more than 40% in my lifetime, which is a fundamental problem. Yeah. When did we last have 415 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere in human civilization? Never. We've got to go back to the Eemian about 3 million years ago or more to find 415 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere.
Okay.
And that was about 6 metres increase in sea level.
Well, 6 metre increase in sea level means that there's a lot of people in trouble.
Absolutely. Well, people are in trouble already.
Yeah, sure. But even I'm thinking half a metre increase is catastrophic, right?
Massive.
So a couple of things just on a practical point. we need to get rid of steel and go back to timber that you mentioned, but that requires us to cut down trees. So do we need to outplant our...
Well, the Germans and the Austrians are world leaders in this. Those of you watching Grand Designs on television will have heard of something called Passivhaus, which is Passivhaus, a German word meaning passive construction. So these are houses that don't have any drafts, basically. You can put a plastic sheet over the front door and create a vacuum inside the house.
Okay.
So there's no drafts.
Yep.
Cross-laminated timber allows you to do that. The Germans and the Austrians are doing it and building these laminated beams from plantation timber.
Okay.
And that's what we would do as well.
So
we would
planted for that purpose.
Planted for the purpose. Now, there's a company in Victoria that's really strongly moving into the space now.
Okay.
They see this as the future. They understand a bit of climate science. There's going to be an emerging market here. So they're trying to do this down at Colac. They're going to build capacity.
Yes.
They're already importing a whole lot of products in that space, so timber products that are highly efficient. The other thing about cross-laminated beams, they don't burn. They're fire resistant, but if you're building a commercial building, and Lend-Lease built a 9-storey one in Docklands, and there are some bigger ones built around the world, you can do the whole building in a few months.
Yeah.
So the cost saving in construction is enormous because I think it comes in boxes and fits together like Lego.
Yeah, there's some amazing stuff online with some of these prefab buildings. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
So this is going to commercial buildings now as well, and the cost savings in construction, plus indoor air quality is better. You know, don't have to use paint. There's no volatile organic compounds. There's a whole bunch of added benefits.
Yep.
You can drill a hole in it if you have to and put a bit of wire through it, or a pipe, or whatever. So it's really got a lot of functionality. So there's a very tall building I know in design, and it's a tall, skinny building. It's effectively a concrete lift shaft as the external part of the building, but everything else in the middle is all cross-laminated timber, 82 floors.
Oh, wow.
So this stuff's being thought about and being designed now.
Yeah.
So this is part of, and this is responding to the need to use less steel, the need to use less cement, and to actually go to materials that are recyclable as well, but can be grown and used for a specific purpose without impacting on native forests.
So there's a few things in this space that are quite the opposite to what you'd, again, I've said a couple of times, naturally think, right? Like going back to timber, you'd think, well, you know, as we said, you cut down trees, that's got to be, but that's actually a good thing. So the way you've described it, so how do you actually work out, is there a resource or a place you can go to run this stuff by? Because, and I'll give you an example. I know someone who's looking at buying a Tesla car, and we think when they're sort of marketed as a very good for the environment, and I have no idea if this is right or wrong, but then apparently it works out that the carbon footprint that's created with the battery and having to get rid of the battery at the end of its life and all that sort of stuff is more than driving a diesel car. Now, I don't know if that's correct or not, but how do you get this information? It's really difficult.
It's pretty right. The embedded energy in a Tesla is really high, but you sort of realise that we're at the beginning of the race.
Yes.
So, I mean, we're not all driving around in Model T Fords either.
Yeah.
Although, I remember someone telling me that an old FJ Holden is actually more fuel efficient than the current Holdens because it doesn't have to run so much electronics and stuff from the same amount of energy in the fuel tank. So there's some interesting thing about that. But look, they're all really good questions to ask.
Yep.
But doubtless, I mean, BMW produced a hydrogen-powered 7 Series back in the 1990s.
Yes.
So hydrogen's coming to vehicles as well.
Yep.
And you should interview this guy, Professor Alexander Subik, who's at Swinburne. Alex is a Russian aerospace engineer, but he consulted to Ferrari for their Formula One hybrid engine a few years ago. Yep. He's an absolute gun. And I recall we were talking about, whether we could reconstruct the Victorian motor car industry by building an extruded plastic Victorian car with a choice of electric or hydrogen engines.
Yes.
And he said, Rob, in due course, cars will be 80% hydrogen and 20% electric.
So why do you have to hang on to the electric bit?
Well, he said, that'll be for personal choice or whatever, but you'll actually have a hydrogen fuel cell powered car. So you'll store the hydrogen in the vehicle, or you'll store it in your fuel cell, and you run an electric motor from your fuel cell.
Oh, so it's still an electric motor, right?
Yeah,
okay, you've got it.
Yeah. So the drive will be electric, but so they're the sort of the big transitions that are coming, and this next decade, we'll see a massive transformation into electric cars initially, but hydrogens, they've all got them. There was a hydrogen Hyundai launched by Ian McFarlane, who was the Minister for Industry at the time. That was launched about 2014 up at Goulburn.
Okay.
They've all got hydrogen cars ready to go as well.
Yeah. So going back to the question, is there a resource or a place you can go to run some of this stuff by? I find that to be the difficult part.
Yeah, it is. There will be, but I don't know where to point you to.
And the reason for the question, just to clarify that, is because, the timber's a great example, right?
Yeah.
I would have thought timber, no, we can't cut down the trees. You're saying it's a good idea that we do in the right format. So how do you find out that information?
Well, there's a group here in Melbourne, I think they're called Wood Solutions, and they're now promoting, so this is coming out of Victorian commercial timber enterprises.
Yep.
They realise that probably they can't continue to cut down native forests, but they've got to work out how to, foresters claim this, we're the great conservationists. Now, I can agree with that to an extent, because it's absolutely, no doubt, it's a renewable resource. Yep. But there are other issues about some of the other ways that they do, and some of the forests are still cutting down, given climate change and the fires we had, and we shouldn't be cutting down any old growth forest. We should be actually going to plantations, and there's a whole lot of plantation timber around the world. In Portugal, South America, Portugal grows more eucalyptus than we do. So these resources are there, but we've actually got to work out where the smart value-adding products are, and these guys, I'm sure it's Wood Solutions and Forest Wood Products Group, they're getting into this really smart stuff. So I don't know whether you'll find too much on, we've got parliamentarians saying, electric, someone wants to steal your ute and put you in an electric car. It's not really the case, of course. There's a company called Unity coming out of Malmo in Sweden, and I suspect some of those electric car companies, their new electric car comes out next year, I believe. It's a two-seater. The passenger sits behind the driver, so it's a central driving position. It's a little bubble, but, given the state of our roads and stuff, I think that'd be pretty cool. It's the size of a Fiat 500 or something like that.
Really small.
But Unity's just installed in Malmo alone 1,500 electric charging stations, and they're all solar powered and electricity's free. Okay. So this is where our media in Australia is pretty bit slow, and our parliamentarians and our lack of general knowledge in Australia on a lot of this stuff is really low, because there's frankly no leadership at the parliamentary level. There's no one even talking a talk, let alone walking a walk. So, we've actually got to understand this stuff. But like Tesla, the Model 3, I forget, how many did he pre-sell? 18 months before the first one was even manufactured. Yeah. People want to go there because they know there's a market there. Now, the next version, there's absolutely no doubt, the next version of Tesla or whatever its competition is, and there's lots of competition out there now.
Yeah, there is,
will be much, much, much more efficient, and they'll be working on how do we transition to hydrogen. So your perfectly legitimate and correct question about the embodied energy in a Tesla, that's going to change. I remember from years ago, from Paul Hawkins' book in 1999, which was called Natural Capital, that a silicon chip produces about 4,000 times its own weight in waste in its manufacture, in energy and packaging and all the stuff that goes around it. So my laptop's off scale.
Yeah,
right, about 10,000 times its own weight in waste in the manufacture of my laptop. So that's the same question.
Yes.
So, the sort of digital tech world with silicon chips and rare metals and stuff like that, the energy involved in making them, that's why we've got to get them back.
Yeah.
So we're finally doing globally e-waste collection. So even, the copper and the wires that goes into the recycling centre, we've got to get that back. We've got to get all the silicon chips back. We've got to get all those precious metals back. All the coltan and all the stuff that's in phones, we've got to get that back.
Yep.
Because we can't afford to destroy forest, to collect it out of rivers and put 9-year-old boys into press gangs for armies because they need, all that sort of hideous stuff that goes on with it. We've actually got to understand the value of stuff and institute massive resource recovery programs in everything that we do.
I think some of the bigger companies are starting to do that. Like, I'm sure Apple just recently has made their first 100% renewable phone. That may or may not be correct, but I think
Apple
that's
will
right.
say that all of our manufacturing is renewable energy powered.
Okay.
Certainly their head office is. They've got a brand new, Google's the same, Microsoft's moving the same way, and I think Apple's saying more or less our products are made with renewable energy. They've got a very good global campaign program to take, phones, iPads, laptops back. to get the materials out of it. But this is, in a sense, this is not new. The Germans did this in the late 1990s. They introduced national legislation that requires you, if I'm making teaspoons, I'm required to set aside, and I think it was 6% of my gross revenue, to set up a scheme to take that teaspoon back and use it. So the person who purchases it is custodian for a period of time, but I'm the long-term custodian, the manufacturer. I have to take responsibility for the materials and the energy in that product. Now, interestingly, Victoria had the same legislation proposed by Dr. Brian Robinson, who led our EPA for its first 25 years. But it was presented by Barry Pullen, who was the Minister for Environment in the Kerner government before it was voted out of office. But that legislation was killed in the upper house in the Legislative Council in Victoria by Mark Birrell, who was the leader, because he could. He thought, no, it was a Labor Party policy and we're just not going to do it. And that would have had us on the par with the Germans, and we'd have much better legislation in Victoria for getting this. So look at the problem we've got now with plastic. We've actually got to understand, we still think about plastic as that recycling and as waste. We've actually got to continue to think about it as a resource. It's oil. So
yes,
we've got to think it was a guy we know we're working with who's turning 5 tons of unrecyclable plastic. He talks about the Windex bottle, which has got stuff in it that's hard to recycle. Yeah. He's turning 5 tons of plastic into 4,000 litres of diesel. Now, that's not a complete circle, but it's better than just burning it for electricity.
Yes. Someone I know actually in the fresh vegetable and fruit and food space, I was talking to him a few years ago, and he was telling me that how the way that they present food to you will determine how much that you buy. And one example that he gave to me is that if you have a whole lettuce that you have to pick up by yourself, and it might be, don't quote me on the exact numbers, it might be a kilo for this lettuce, right? If they actually give you 200 grams and put it in a plastic bag with a nice label on it, they can actually charge you more than the full 1 kilo. So you start thinking along those lines, and you kind of realise that there's a lot of marketing that comes behind a lot of this stuff, which is profit-driven, not for the good of the world driven, I guess, to put it that way.
The life cycle analysis of that transaction is wrong.
Yeah, it is,
right?
yeah.
It's just wrong. So my wife and I, when we shop, we've got a couple of plastic bags in our shopping bag. Yeah. I bought it from, I actually bought a new one recently when we travelled to the UK last year, which is another horrendous thing to do. I don't get on avgas-powered jets much anymore because, you can go vegan as much as like, but if you take one trip to London every year, it just blows all that out of the water.
Yes.
So recycled coffee bean bag, and we just put everything in a bag. It's a difficult thing to do because it's nice and attractive. It's very convenient. But see, I've used to talk about, the energy transaction, which is dad's at work. He's driven to work in the, what do we call it? We call it a V8 something or other.
Yep.
And mum's at home and she's got the 4-wheel drive. Let's just say it's a simple Toyota truck, right? It's a Land Cruiser truck. Mm-hmm. And she goes and picks up Johnny from his school and Betty from her school and drives to the supermarket and buys a litre of milk and a loaf of bread and goes home again. The energy budget of that hour is off scale.
Yes.
We can't afford to do that anymore. Now, it's one of the reasons why I'm really interested in the Amazon model, where they deliver to you, although that's got to be changed a fair bit. There's still a lot of carbon involved in those transactions. But the sooner our supermarkets work out that we can't do the John and Betty with mum in the 4-wheel drive after school to the supermarket with all the lights blazing and all the freezers and stuff, the smart grocery companies are going to be delivering to us.
Oh,
much more energy efficient,
yep.
And we're going to work out what that energy transaction is, what that energy budget is, and we're going to have to reward them for doing the delivery because it's keeping people off the roads, and it's reducing emissions to atmosphere.
Yes.
For John and Betty's sake.
And they're doing things like building dark warehouses where there's no lights in their entire packing assembly line unless there's a problem and someone's got to actually go in and see and fix it.
And the food thing is a really interesting thing. I mean, we try also. I'm a bit lucky. My wife's a chef, right? So I eat very well.
Oh, yeah.
So, and we've also got to not expect there to be mangoes on the shelf 12 months a year. We've got to not expect to get everything we want 12 months. It's better to cook seasonally and enjoy the fresh produce because the storage of apples and pears and whatever else cost energy. The transport of, Victorians, we make wonderful tomatoes here, but we import them all from Queensland.
Yep.
Because we expect to get beautiful tomatoes 12 months a year. No. Wait till summertime when they're good. Eat something, We don't expect in the middle of July to find a Victorian-grown tomato that looks fantastic. Pretty hard to find unless you've got some bloke with a hothouse down the road.
Yes.
Find something else that's really lovely to eat that's in season now. We've really got to. This is a really important component, and we got to. Our levels of food waste are just off scale as well, and you got to think that. So if you only eat half your lettuce, and you throw it even in the compost bin, you got to understand that there's an energy budget that got that half lettuce to your fridge, from the grower to the store to the lighting to the refrigeration. You went and bought it. Maybe you took the car, maybe you walked, but then you stored it in your fridge for a while, and then you threw half it away. So we've actually got to think a lot differently about how we live our lives.
And this has come up, this way of thinking, particularly with people who are involved with big brands that I've spoken to, that don't think in a transactional sense. They do think to use, and they use the same word too, and you did before, they're just custodians of the brand for this certain amount of time. And I think that's a really great way to start looking at things, right? Like if you're a manufacturer, you're not buying stuff and pumping it out. You're part of the life cycle which should be ongoing of these resources, and we have to manage them as best possible. So it's a different, I guess, lots of things in life come back to mindset, right? It's just an entirely different way of approaching it.
This is where having worked in commercial television for over 30 years, I do hold the advertising and marketing industry to account, because the people didn't ask for chlorofluorocarbon propelled canisters to kill flies. Someone developed a chemical company, produced that product and said, let's do that, and let's work out what the marketing campaign, because it's more convenient than the old pump thing that my mum used to use to pump Mortine around the place. Now we don't use any of those things anymore, but the marketing advertising industry needs to think a whole lot closer about what they choose to promote and why.
Yeah.
And it's about packaging. We're working with a company that's turning over 150 million a year, produces about 250 lines of food in plastic products, and they want to get out. We got to stop packaging in plastic, Rob, work out what it is. I was speaking to BASF yesterday, a huge German chemical company. They say, and about 70% of our products now are synthetic, but the biggest question we're getting from retailers and packaging is, what's after plastic? We can't afford to keep using plastic, because there's now backlash in the community. And they understand the issue. They say, we don't want our straw to be found in a turtle's nose on the reef in Vanuatu. We can't afford the brand damage. Yep. So there's a lot of things happening in that space.
Okay, so I'm thinking like a can floating along or whatever, it has a brand name on it. That becomes a photo, which in this day and age with the power of the internet, that goes very quick.
Absolutely.
So this is a brand protection issue as well.
So we do some work with the National Retail Association with their membership. They've founded a new sustainability committee to look at a range of these issues. And these are anything from, not really corner store, but small businesses up to the big players. And their emerging huge issue is supply chain. Yes. And it's being reflected. We've got Target, for example, in the news currently, really worried about whether the manufacture of these products that we're selling in our store involve modern slavery.
Yep.
That's linked.
Still a huge issue.
I need to know that the manufacture of this stuff is legitimate. And that comes back to what we now have, the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which were instituted and signed by Australia along with 192 other countries on the 1st of January 2016, which are 17 goals that deal with all these issues. The first one's no poverty. The last one's partnerships for the goals. There's life underwater, life on land, responsible production and consumption, health and well-being, gender equality, reduced inequality in the workplace. So all of these things are now being considered, unfortunately not very well by the majority of companies in Australia. In the EU, about 60, there's an estimate that 60% of businesses in the EU now already have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals built into their business plan.
Yep.
There's some leading companies in Australia, particularly the water authorities and some of the banks, that are doing a pretty good job. But this looks at all of these issues. So I need to know, for the sake of my brand and my business, but also my staff are demanding, so particularly the millennials are demanding that they know that I'm doing the right thing. I'm not going to work for you if I think that the products we're making or the way we're dealing with people is inappropriate in the new world. I should also say that some of the millennials are the best advocates of this stuff, but their practice is not as good as they're preaching. Yeah. However, and for example, I'm a champion of the kids going on strike on Fridays for climate. We have to. I mean, I've been banging on about this stuff for 30, 40 years, but I'm delighted and I'll support them every day because they at least get it. They haven't been taught very well how to practice what they're preaching. There's been a gap in their culture development. So, in other words, they're probably going to choose the lettuce with with 3 leaves,
yes,
in a nice package because it's convenient, because that's what they grew up with.
Yeah.
Because they actually don't, you can buy whole lettuces, can you, and put them in a calico bag.
Yep, and get 5 times the amount for less money.
For less money, yes. I mean, I taught this to my son, who from an early age I insisted puts out the bins, right? So we've got the small rubbish, the stuff that's going to landfill, which we try and minimise. So I said, Nico, the deal here is, the less stuff we buy, the less waste we make, the less time you have to carry the bins up the steps. He got that pretty quickly. And the same with the recycling. I said, well, just because it's recycled doesn't mean it's good.
Yes.
There's a whole lot of energy involved. So I said, why are you buying the 6 slices of salami in the plastic container when we can buy a whole salami for cheaper than the 6 slices and we've got no packaging?
Yeah.
Ah, right. So, they're pretty simple questions. And if you haven't grown up that way, so, the stuff my grandmother and grandfather practiced, I'm trying to find.
Yeah,
well, they were very good at it.
If you think about it in money terms, though, right, like it actually does make a lot of sense. So if you go out and you earn, let's say, $1,000 a week, to use round numbers, you don't collect that money. I know it goes straight into your bank account, but effectively you don't take that money, go home, and then on Saturday morning throw 200 in the bin, do you?
No, that's right. We've been caught up with a few things in this space. One was user pays. So in a wealthy country like Australia, everybody says, I've got plenty of money, I'll just pay for it. I'll just pay to pollute. Well, we can't afford to have that anymore. And the other thing that we've got caught up in, the sort of resource recovery thing, is this business of commingling on the curbside. So we tend to say, there's that box over there, that's that recycling. Well, it's not. That's a box of recyclable material, and we actually don't recycle a lot of it. So we just put it into the bin. We put it into so we contaminate the office paper that's in the bin with, some dribbles from something else or some other thing, or a bit of broken glass. None of it can be used, and a whole lot goes to landfill. So the commingling of our recyclables has been a problem. My business partner David's just been to Japan, and there's a town there that's 100% they recycle. They don't have any waste. And if I've got a box of stuff, I take it along to the recycling centre and I separate it into 45 different containers.
Oh, wow.
It's all used.
Yep.
Everything's used. But I have to do it myself.
Okay.
Right? I don't just out of sight, out of mind it, and the bloke comes to put it on the street and some bloke takes it away and it's dealt with.
Yep.
That's just out of sight, out of mind behaviour.
Yep.
We've got to stop that.
Yep. It's probably a negative and a positive way of looking at some of this stuff, right? It's certainly a problem that we need to address and we need to fix, as we've spent a bit of time talking about. But there's also great opportunity that comes from all of this, right? And in every sort of topic turn that we've taken here, there's great opportunity for industry to really benefit. So where are the, I'm thinking timber from our discussion from just earlier is one of them, but where are the really big opportunities that are not only the right thing, but are highly profitable?
Yeah, I think in the new economy, and we haven't really spoken specifically about the circular economy, which is the thing that's coming. Victorian government has just issued a new paper on circular economy and what that means. That means is as we design things, we design to get them back and use them in a circular economy.
Yep.
The most important thing we need to think about this transition is jobs. This is where the jobs of the future are going to come from. We haven't spoken about growth. I mean, there's growth and there's growth. I mean, the proposition of perpetual growth, David Suzuki would say, is neither plausible nor possible.
Yes.
If we continue to use the growth model that we have, which is just consumption of stuff in a pipeline, if we get it back, though, we can actually create more jobs using the same materials So, for example, if you look at the textile industry, Salvo stores only resell about 30% of the material that people give them in bins, right?
Oh, they have a lot of rules and regulations around that now.
Or lots of rules and regs, but they've got stockpiles of stuff that's bigger than this building, of stuff they don't want to put into landfill. We haven't developed the technology to recycle fabrics and textiles. Why not? We haven't bothered. I haven't even thought about it. Right now, the rate which I know teenage girls buy tops and things like that and throw them away after I've worn that twice or three times already. I can't wear that again. So it goes in the bin. So we can't afford to do that. We actually have the technology. Deakin University is working on this. They've got some really good stuff. They're reconstituting denim from recycled denim. They're extracting the dyes and pounding the cotton into powder and then reconstructing it and using the same dye to make new denim in the lab.
Oh, wow.
Right? So this stuff's coming. But, so your cotton shirt is great. We can recycle all that. But if it's got polyester stitching, it's a real problem. So we've actually got to work out how we design things so we can get these materials back. Now, that's a bit of a project that we've got on low heat in the office here. But how do we do that? So,
because bamboo, I think, is a big...
Bamboo's fantastic. I don't think I've got bamboo socks on today, but I've got other things I'm wearing today that are made of bamboo.
Yeah, well, I'll say it. I'm actually wearing bamboo underpants now.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah, they're great. They're fantastic materials. But we actually... So you can imagine if we had all those empty factories in Geelong and all those people out of work from Alcoa and wherever else, we're actually going to need those hands, do the manual labour. We're going to get used to doing manual things and employ people. The Scandinavians have been disassembling white goods since the 90s, right? Because the electric motors...
fridges, we're talking washing machines.
Because the electric motors in the fridges and stuff, they were polluting their groundwater in landfill. So they stopped landfill.
Oh.
In fact, there's been legislation in the EU since, I'm going to think, July the 1st, 2016 or 2017, no more landfill. Right? The Scandis have been doing it since the 90s. So they actually manually disassemble your fridge or your washing machine or your dishwasher and get everything back.
Yeah.
For all sorts of good reasons. The Scandinavians have also had a carbon price since the 90s, and Norwegians actually haven't gone broke. Every Norwegian's sitting on about 30 million bucks, but 30 million euros, because they've got a 980 billion euro pension fund, that's superannuation fund, and a 1.02 trillion euro sovereign wealth fund because they tax their oil industry. Exactly the same as Julia Gillard wanted to do.
So that was actually a good idea, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's got to be different drivers. Now, if we come back to the Sustainable Development Goals, if you put a business decision through the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, I guarantee you'll come up with a different answer than you would have come up with 10 years ago. This is not just about profit. There's a guy called John Elkington, whom I happen to know. Now, people won't know John's name, but they might understand the concept of the triple bottom line. Now, John coined that about 26 years ago. That he said, look, we can't just look at an economic lens for this decision. We've got to look at social issues and environmental issues.
Yep.
So they were the three things. He said, there's a triple bottom line, not just a single economic bottom line. He did a product recall on a triple bottom line 18 months ago. Okay. He said it didn't work because everyone's still doing economic bottom line only.
Yes.
With a bit of a nod to some social stuff and a bit of a nod to environmental stuff.
Yep.
We can't possibly afford, that's an unsustainable economy.
Okay.
So the Sustainable Development Goals is the next extension of that. And it extends from the Millennium Development Goals that came in 2001, were remarkably successful in reducing global poverty by about 67%. But Ban Ki-moon and a guy called Jeff Sachs, professor of economics from Columbia University in New York, Ban Ki-moon went to Sachs and said, look, hey Jeff, we've forgotten about our environment. We've got to move the Millennium Development Goals on, so now we have the Sustainable Development Goals. And I really encourage any business, large or small, to look at the Sustainable Development Goals and work out, and not only look at how you build those Sustainable Development Goals into your own business, but there's plenty of stuff online about how my business grew, how my products are better, how my staff are happier and more productive, and all the things you'd expect.
Yes.
By actually embedding the Sustainable Development Goals into your business.
Yes.
It's a bit like the cost argument. $1 spent today saves me spending another $10 in 10 years' time.
Yes.
Get it right now. And reposition your business against your competition.
That's a full circle in itself, right? Because that goes straight back to your marketing. You can now say that I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and these are the reasons for it, and that can become good content, to use the word that we all use today in our marketing, that you can put out there, of course, in an honest and ethical way, about how you're doing the right thing, which is, as you said before, becoming an employer of choice is something that is becoming more and more important, because getting people to work in our companies is hard and expensive. So all of these things, you can start to see, a little bit into this conversation, how it can all come together for a much, much better outcome.
It means we've got to think a bit more. I mean, it's just not the same as it was when I was a boy, or, when I was taking lessons from my dad. We've got limitless amounts of information. You've got to work out this is the business of going back to climate change. It's really about who you listen to. You're going to listen to a journalist from a newspaper, or you can listen to a climate scientist, right? So where do I go for my information? And how do I stay on the cutting edge, doing lots and lots and lots of bulletin boards and newsletters and stuff from, I can't think of Sustainable Brands, for example, is a great one, and there's another foundation, but they can come back to you and I'll let you know, and you can let people know that, who are doing this circular economy stuff. This is all, there's plenty of places you can go and find out about this. I mean, follow NASA, don't follow Shane Warne, follow NASA or the Royal Society, or, some of the great scientific institutions, or even Sustainability Victoria. Just see what they're talking about. I mean, we're working with a company, for example, that's turning plastic into railway sleepers.
Oh, wow.
Right? Sustainability Victoria is supporting that. So this means that plastic's going to have a 30, 40, 50-year life.
Yep.
And used valuably and better than timber. So we're not cutting down red gum in our forests. We're actually using materials that's going to be more durable and can be used again. If you have to replace them, you actually pick it up and you can recycle it again. So, it's just smarter thinking, and the information's out there. We've actually got to make the choice. Now, talking to any employers that might be listening to, don't take that responsibility on for yourself. We do this sort of stuff as well. Work out where your team is in the group, and if it's only got half a dozen or three in your group, sit down and think about it together. Find out where the bright ideas are in your company. Who can help me work this out? Yep. I don't want to do that, or should we be doing this, or shouldn't we be doing this? Work out where the bright ideas. Someone will say, "Oh, go to that website there. You'll find out some answers." So we've got developed. As a mate of mine, I used to chair a UNESCO biosphere, and Jeff Weir, who runs the Dolphin Research Institute down there at Hastings, and we are so averse to change in this country in particular. He said, "Rob, we actually need to develop a lust for change. We need to be looking to change to something better on a daily basis if you can. There are better ways of doing things." Yeah. If we didn't change, we'd still have lead in paint. We'd all still be smoking cigarettes. We wouldn't have seat belts in cars, right? We've actually got to understand that we really got to drive change for the better. We've got a group tomorrow. We have a ReThink tank, and we're putting smart digi and tech and innovative people together in the same room and watching them come up with ideas.
Yes.
And they go, "Oh, I didn't know you were doing that. That's fantastic. Can we talk about that later?"
Yeah.
And this is where we're going to get ourselves out of some of these wicked problems, is really putting people, "Oh, this is my experience, that doesn't work. Oh, okay, I'll think about that another way." We can't just sort of go on looking at these wicked problems in the face and not doing anything about them. We're a smart enough country. We've got the resources to do it. We've actually got to empower ourselves and our teams to come up with better ideas.
And where you get your information from is an important one. I've just written down here, audit your Facebook and other feeds that you're getting your stuff from, right? And ask yourself that question, is this who I am? Is this what I want to listen to? Is this the information that I should be thinking about? And if it is, great. And if not, well, then maybe some self-reflection on that is a good idea.
Yeah.
I'm going to be mindful of your time, Rob, but many people grew up with you on television. Where did this passion for sustainability originally come from?
Well, I was at university. I arrived at Melbourne University in 1971, so you can work out how old I am. I'm getting very old now. And that was a very interesting time. So if you think back that far, I was in the last call-up for Vietnam. I arrived at Melbourne University. There were draft resistors on campus in the Union Building, hold up. There was a federal police break-in to break them out. There was a pirate radio station on campus. Yeah. That year we had the moratorium marches, 100,000 people twice in the streets in the city in Melbourne. So communications was all of a sudden huge. We had war in our living rooms on the television within 24 hours of it happening. That was all brand new. This was, not long after Man on the Moon, whilst we're talking about Armstrong and Aldrin and Collins.
Yes.
It was a very dynamic time, but it was also the tail end of the first environment revolution. Rachel Carson had written Silent Spring in the early 60s. Garrett Hardin wrote The Tragedy of the Commons. Paul Ehrlich and his wife wrote The Population Bomb. And all this stuff was brand new. So Carson's expose was on heavy metals and pesticides in the environment, and Ehrlich was talking about population growth and its implications. The Club of Rome reports, the limits to growth. People were saying, does this model really work? So we were getting this material on our reading lists at the very time that our professors that it was being released.
Yes.
So it was all brand new. So it was very, very dynamic time. I finished my degree. I did a degree in science with a major in physical geography. I didn't do meteorology, contrary to popular opinion. In fact, I avoided meteorology and climatology completely, but I became a physical geographer, so using maps and diagrams to tell stories.
Yep.
So I said, well, why would, I always used to say, no, I don't understand more about meteorology than the Bureau of Meteorology. That would be ridiculous. But what I do have a skill at is explaining to people using that information and using maps and diagrams and things on television to explain what's going on. Because I subsequently, when I finished my honours and a couple of other things, I went to work at the Melbourne State College, which is now part of the Melbourne University. So I taught in a Bachelor of Environmental Science Education degree course in 1975. And even I think about that is pretty remarkable.
How many were in that class?
Well, it was full. They had
really? Okay.
Yeah, it was the second year of that course, and they had 30 or 40 went through, did a 4-year degree in environmental science education. And I still see, in fact, one of those students is on the Council of the Royal Society of Victoria with me today. No, Pam was a student with me, but I know where they all are. They're terrific people. So we were talking about methyl mercury poisoning in fish in Japan. We were talking about resource consumption. We were talking about climate. We were talking about all the issues in fact, I still give talks and presentations, and the things that I learned about as an undergrad are still problems today, with the possible exception of ozone in the stratosphere. But all those problems are worse today than they were when I learned about them.
Makes sense,
right?
Yep.
And even the stratospheric ozone depletion from CFCs is going to take another 50 years to rectify.
We used to hear a lot about the hole in the ozone layer, didn't we?
Well, it's still there, but it's sort of, we've managed it very quickly. And this is a point. There's a guy called Sherwood Rowland, I think his name. I met him once, he spoke here, and he was the father of acid rain research, but he also got shifted into when the Yanks first discovered the hole in the ozone layer. They went, there's a problem. And they went to Bill Clinton and said, hey, we've got a problem. We know what it is. We've found this hole. And then again, the next November, in the Southern Hemisphere, there it was again bigger, and they acted immediately and phase out CFCs and halons and all the other things. And people still say today that climate change hasn't had its ozone hole moment. There hasn't been a catastrophic event that says to everybody, oh boy, we've got this global warming issue, we've got to deal with it.
Which is really comforting in some ways to know that we can, when we need to, act and turn around and get things done, right? So at the moment we haven't done it with this climate change problem issue, whatever you want to call it, but we have to be getting to the tipping point, don't we?
Well, we do, but you just wonder how. Culture is a very slow thing to change. There's a wonderful book called The Clock of the Long Now, and it talks about 6 different rates of pace and change in our modern societies, the most rapid being art and fashion, the next slightly slower one being commerce, the Nikkei Dow and the Dow Jones and how the market changes, and the third one being infrastructure, the rate with which we change railway lines and roads and buildings and stuff like that. Then there are 3 slow ones. And the first of those is governance. We haven't changed our governance in this country since 1901.
Yep.
Right? And it really wasn't much different to what we inherited before that.
Yep.
The second to the slowest of all is culture. We haven't changed our culture ever in this country.
Okay, well, you can get in a lot of rabbit holes with that, can't you?
Yeah. And guess what the slowest of all is? Nature.
Yeah, well, that does make sense.
Yeah, it does make sense.
Yeah.
The problem we've got is we've got art and fashion and economics making choices about the slow one.
Yes.
Right? So that's a massive dilemma. So the rate with which we think about change, and that's why we've got to develop a lust for change, we've actually got to manage that a whole lot better. So if I tell you a story, and it comes back to plumbing and climate. In 1972, I was sitting in a class, and Dr. Tom Neales is now dead, in botany, and it was called Conservation, Global and Local Aspects. And we learned, Tom was teaching us about the greenhouse effect, which was coming up to the Vilac Agreement in 1987 and stuff. So it was really coming on. Mind you, we'd known about the greenhouse effect effectively, since Tyndall in 1860. Now, in 1972, a lot of your listeners will recall we had massive floods in the city of Melbourne down Elizabeth Street, and there was Volkswagen flooding down the street and a whole bunch of stuff like that. So this was at the same time. So we're sitting in this class with Tom saying, okay, so Tom, if all you say about the greenhouse effect is true, the Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works is going to have to increase the size of the drains in Elizabeth Street, I guess. And yeah, sure. They still haven't done them.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Still hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we still get this pushback from Melbourne Water, and it happened in, when did we have those last big storms, 2013 or something like that? And you're still getting this line. I remember it. It was at a World Plumbing Day event at the Plumbing Industry Climate Action Centre in Brunswick.
Yes.
And there was a bloke from Melbourne Water saying, how could we expect to have such big storms? Right? It's just bloody nonsense.
Yeah.
So we've actually got to, we've got to take some leadership from our scientists rather than, everybody thinks they've got a different opinion to a climate scientist. And we've got to actually work out how do we really support the things that we need, again, for my John and Betty and my granddaughter's sake.
Yes.
Or even going back to our very first commentary, we don't need any more strategies, plans and goals. We actually need targets for things to do. We know what to do. We've just got to get on and do it.
Yeah.
So I get a bit frustrated sometimes at my age, but I'm still pedaling away. Just to finish off your original question, so I finished my time, I was at Melbourne State College teaching all this stuff, and I was approached by a new news director from Channel O, and they decided that they needed a new weather presenter for Channel O, and they didn't want somebody from the show business who knew all about how to present the weather but nothing about the weather, and they didn't want somebody from the Weather Bureau who knew all about the weather but nothing about how to present it.
Yep.
But they'd come up with the bright idea they needed a teacher-type person to fill that gap.
Help people make sense of the weather.
Yeah. So we introduced a few really good things. I mean, they were really good. I had some bright ideas. I mean, we did things like Channel O at Nunawading was the first television station in the world to put the pressure analysis on top of a satellite photograph. Okay. It's just two different graphical ways of representing the same data.
Yep.
So we did that. We actually put the first animated satellite images to air as well, because I used to drive from the university, finish a lab. I used to drive to the Weather Bureau on the corner of Latrobe and Spring Street, pick up two halves of a black and white photograph, hard copy satellite photograph, right, so that long ago, stick them together with sticky tape and take a picture of it and put it to air. And I worked out, if I keep today's, and as well as picking up the one from this afternoon, if I get the one from this morning, we actually did a videotape dissolve from one to the other. So we made the clouds from yesterday move just in 3 phases.
But this is the first iteration.
Yeah, before the Weather Bureau even did it.
Yeah, wow.
So it's about thinking about how you represent data and how you actually understand what tomorrow is going to be like for the punter watching the news. Yeah. So I did that for 3 different networks for 30-odd years, but we also developed our first environmental consultancy was in 1992. So we got back to sort of first principles, the stuff that I'd been doing at uni, and started environmental business strategies back in those days, and there's been a few iterations of that, but right up to ReThink Sustainability today.
My mum actually told me this, that she remembers that you pioneered the 4-day forecast. Is that right?
4-day forecast, yes. They came to me and said, oh, look, can you do... there was a guy called Dr. George Fishback working for one of the Los Angeles television companies, and the guy from the newsroom at Channel O brought this video in and showed me and said, look, can you do that 4-day forecast? I said, well, I don't know. I'll find out. So I went and talked to the Weather Bureau, and effectively the Weather Bureau was already doing that. They just didn't release it. They were too worried about 4-day forecast. So I said, well, how about...
being inaccurate or...
Yeah, about being
seen as wrong.
Being seen as wrong. So I said, well, how about I do it? And they said, oh, we wouldn't mind at all, as long as it's just got your name on it. So I got away with that. I got away with that for years. And Rob Gell's 4-day forecast, and interesting, your mum still remembers it. But it was... I always maintained it was how you present the information. And the Weather Bureau had didn't have a good relationship with the media. There was no real engagement. Interestingly, years on, I used to help the World Meteorological Organization do training courses for meteorologists in the South Pacific and elsewhere. How do you engage with the media in a positive way? I always used to maintain, if I say to you, no, you're wrong, Matt, tomorrow's going to be 18 degrees, cloudy in the morning, sunny in the afternoon, I own that forecast. As opposed to if I say, look, current thinking of the Bureau is there's a cold front on the way, so we're expecting that be cloudy in the morning, sunny in the afternoon, but there might be more cloud coming in the afternoon because of, and we're looking at a temperature in the high teens. You've got a much better understanding of what tomorrow's going to be, and you've left some room for error. And I say, no, we reckon we can go out to 7 days because the modelling says this, and we reckon we're really confident, or the Bureau is really confident, that Saturday's going to be a sunny day for the grand final.
Yep.
Or you might say, no, look, the models are all over the place. We're not even confident about tomorrow. The rest of the week, 52 pickup or whatever you like. If you're actually honest with people and explain to them where the science is and what you're capable of doing, people just give you that latitude.
Yeah.
Because you've explained to me why.
Yeah. Yeah, the context. So, it's a communication issue, yeah.
Absolutely. So, I didn't study meteorology, but I understand the forecast and what the guys do and got to know them, and some of them became very good friends. But it's about the communication skill, and it's the thing that actually distinguishes our species.
Yeah, ability to communicate.
Ability to communicate.
So what do you feel about technology, and we've mentioned that a few times, but weather apps and that sort of thing now? Is it a good time?
Oh, the apps are great.
Because for me growing up, like, you sat down every night and you watched the 6 o'clock news. That was it. And everyone would be quiet. The sport's on, the weather followed just after, and, we'd watch you. But now it's at our fingertips and we can have it any time, and it's probably, I'm going to say, without knowing, a lot more accurate these days as well.
And it's better than anything you'll see on television.
So you agree that this is a good step forward?
I mean, we started putting the Weather Bureaus, we got a direct feed of the Weather Bureau weather radar data, and we put it on our own background. So they released that as a data feed. I once visited a potato farmer up around Narrandera somewhere. So the critical industries are strawberry growers, about frost.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Frost.
Yeah.
People transporting chocolate.
Yep.
Meat pie makers. I mean, if it's going to be, if the first final in September is going to be 23 degrees, don't bother taking too many pies to the MCG because you're not going to get purchased.
Yep. You're going to buy cornettos instead.
If it's going to be 16, take lots.
Yep.
Right? If it's going to be 38 degrees overnight, don't bother transporting your chocolate because you're going to blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Frost for strawberry farmers. I met this spud grower up around Narrandera, and he used to know, I'd come in to the house, the farm, doing whatever I was doing, and we had silence in the house in the second half hour of Channel 10 News. There wasn't not a word, because I couldn't afford to miss the weather radar. He said, and he showed me, I've got $280,000 worth of spuds sitting in the ground over there, and I know there's a cold front coming, and I want to know exactly when it's coming. And you're the only way I can find out.
Did that pressure ever get to you?
No. You just do your best. And he said, no, mate, love it. And surfers, for, wind. No one talks about wind. Or no one explained wind, or still don't really. Weather's kind of come full circle from when I started, but we won't go there. But, surfers, I don't know where the wind is, man. It's offshore.
Yeah.
And we were the only ones talking about it. Because you've got to understand where your interest of and fishermen, that sort of stuff. They need to know where the wind's onshore, offshore, when the change's coming, that sort of stuff. So you've got to put it into a context that people can understand.
Actually, I remember in high school now, there used to be a section in the newspaper, I'm not sure if there still is, but the surf report and conditions about all the wind. Yeah, I remember that.
Well, I had a good
surfing, people cutting it out and keeping it in their diary for the following weekend and all that.
And there'll be tidal wave Ted Bainbridge, my mate from the Peninsula Surf Centre. So I met Ted. I started at television in 1979 and 3XY in about June or July of the same year, and Ted Bainbridge was doing the surf report. We became great mates because we're talking about the same stuff.
Same thing, yeah.
And it's another way of understanding where the interest areas are. So understanding that complexity is really important. That becomes part of your communication. Just on weather and communication, there's a really good initiative going on now. David Holmes at Monash University is replicating, and has got money from the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation to make available climate data to the commercial television stations for the weather presenters to include that in the weather forecast. And that's been a very, very valuable breakthrough in the last 18 months or so. So we got money to fund that, so they're collecting that data and now currently Jane Bunn on Seven's using it, and Paul, who escaped me, he's using it on ABC as well. Yeah. We really should do it. Unfortunately, though, commercial television stations in newsrooms are either disbelievers. I mean, I worked with 3 news directors over 30-odd years, or more than that, but 2 or 3 in particular, and they were climate denialists. They had no right to be, and they really wouldn't let me put anything on air that I wanted to put on, just simple stuff.
Oh, okay.
But now that's changing a bit. And media is going to be critical in re-educating the Australian community about global heating, as you might call it now, and all of these other things. If we go back to first principles, television licences were granted to bring information immediately to the general public. It wasn't about MasterChef and the sort of stuff we're getting. That's not why television licences were granted.
The influence of marketing came later.
Yeah, that's right. So it's about providing important information to the public in real time. Now, that's been compromised in all sorts of ways. And I go back to 1998 or thereabouts. There was a massive hailstorm that cost the insurance industry something like $3 billion in Sydney. And I talked about it with the forecasters here in Melbourne. They said there's a huge storm heading for Sydney. And I mentioned it in Channel 9's news at about, 6 on whatever day of the week it was. I came off the set and said, look, we should be letting the Channel 9 newsroom in Sydney know. They're probably going to mention it in their news. But for the 8 o'clock bulletin, they pre-record it. In Melbourne, Peter Hitchener records the 8 o'clock 30 seconds straight after the news.
Oh, and there's one at like 10:30.
Yeah, they're pre-recorded. They're not up to date. They're just whatever happened.
Yes.
So if you've got a hailstorm approaching Sydney that's going to do $3 billion worth of damage, and you have a licence that says you have to inform the public, what do? The Bureau got hauled across the coals for not informing the people about the hailstorm. Well, they actually did, but the television station refused. They got a pre-recorded bulletin that would have otherwise, if it had been live, they could have
changed
warned it. They refused also to put a crawl, a little text across the bottom. They break into programming to do that. Now, that's appalling.
Yeah.
That's appalling. So the media has actually got to sort of shape up a bit in this space as well.
So am I hearing maybe a possible return to the nightly news for
I think
Gell?
there's not better ways of doing it.
Okay.
The other possibility that's been put to me even since the days that I was at Channel 9 was to get into politics, but I'm too old for that now. But I think even what you're doing here, and we're a relatively new company, but we're looking at doing some things like that. There's better ways to inform people. But the powerhouses of commercial television in particular are a real problem globally.
Yeah.
In misinformation or lack of information.
Although there's many of these new mediums now that, they are losing power, and some would argue very quickly, and speaks directly to the power of social media, podcasting, a lot of these other forms now that are better delivering information, I would argue.
And I think we actually need some political leadership. You don't expect the politicians to come up with the right answer, to be able to have all the answers, which they seem to think they have to have. They kind of hate picking winners, but then they do.
Yeah, they're claiming them.
Whereas they should just be saying, we need to do this, but they've actually got to pick the high-level answers. The dialogue that we've had in Australia over the last 10 years, from Kevin Rudd got in with, climate change is the biggest issue of all time, and so it is. Tony Abbott's performance, and I just don't know whether he just doesn't understand or whatever, but we basically lost a decade in Australia. Turnbull government did nothing. Turnbull understands it implicitly. Julia Gillard's legislation actually was very successful and actually reduced Australia's emissions. Even Peter Garrett's Pink Bat program, despite the fact that he's castigated for it, actually reduced Australia's emissions. It's actually measurable. There'll be some people perhaps in the sort of plumbing fraternity. There are good plumbers and bad plumbers. There are good sparkies and bad sparkies. There are good Pink Bats installers and bad ones, and people took the opportunity. The government put a few $1 billion on the table, and there were some opportunists, and some kids got killed, which is hideously unfortunate. But it's frankly not the minister's fault.
Yes.
He's not out in the roof.
Yeah.
we actually got to understand that, we still build houses, well, not as bad, new houses, but majority of our housing stock leaks like sieves. I mean, they're rated about 2 stars. It's pathetic. And so the Pink Bats campaign was actually a really valuable thing to do, reduced our emissions because it made our houses more energy efficient. And we've got to do all that sort of stuff as well. So we need that kind of high level, even just to get politicians speaking about it, saying, oh, yeah, we need to reinvest in biodiversity. We need to reinvest in this. We've got to do much more in this. Now, people can say, where's the money going to come from? I say, well, we're run out. We're doing this, that, and as much as we can. We need business to support whatever. But there's got to be a different dialogue on these important issues.
And everything stems from that conversation. A question, Rob, that I ask everybody, which I'm sure is going to be pretty easy for you. If you could have one law changed, what would it be?
I've been asked this before, and
You've been asked it before?
Yeah.
You're the first person that ever said...
And I'm going to go back to the same answer because it's been done before, and that's to take environmental decision-making out of the hands of politicians.
Put it in the hands of...
Another group, people without a political interest or that can be bought and sold. Now, interestingly, the US Congress debated this for 4 days back in the 90s, whether that should be the case.
Yep.
Because all of these big issues were emerging in that time. Now, we've had a couple of examples as well. The Land Conservation Council here in Victoria had the delegated authority to develop our wonderful system of national parks in Victoria. Mm-hmm. Without the Land Conservation Council, this kind of group that was just a bit distance from government. They were a government authority, but the government actually let them run. That was Dick Hamer's government in particular, and they came back with recommendations and they're taken up. So there are a number of things. Now, we've also there's a group called the New Democracy Foundation,
okay,
and they're run out of University of New South Wales. I think that's where the secretariat is. Now, this is a group that its membership consists of, I still think, of about 8 former state premiers, both sides, Liberal, Labor. Their proposition is that adversarial politics is killing our decision-making in this country. So if you've got a wicked problem, give it to us.
Yep.
We'll come up with a resolution. Now, I think they've done a project now finally in Victoria, but they hadn't done what Victoria had been the only state where they hadn't worked that way. And there are groups like that around the world where those really difficult decisions are taken out of the hands of politicians whose daily schedule really doesn't let them get their heads around some complex problems, where they really need to sit and concentrate on a particular decision around a particular issue, where you frankly can't expect the range of individuals we have in our Australian Federal Parliament. They're not going to understand half of the issues. So you give it to a group that you can trust and rely, that's ecumenical, maybe it represents both sides of politics, but you give them the chance to make those critical decisions out of the house, whereas politician is distracted by any number of things on a daily basis. And I think, there are a range of models for that.
Okay. If someone wants to get in contact with you, you have a website, I assume?
Yeah, my personal website's not very up to date, unfortunately, but that's robgell.com. But the ReThink Sustainability website's available. If anyone wants to, there's a spot there. You can send us an email, and happy to respond.
And do you do anything socially to send messages out at this point?
At Rob Gell on Twitter and at ReThink_Sustain is ReThink Sustainability's Twitter handle. ReThink Sustainability's got a Facebook page, as I have a Facebook page. The ReThink Sustainability Facebook page is really, we're running a business, so it's as non-political or apolitical as I can make it.
Yep.
But it's articles of interest, what's going on around the world from the sources that I look at, not some of the more local ones perhaps. The same with at ReThink Sustain on Twitter. It's really looking at, do yourself a favour, follow the Royal Society or NASA or some of the great scientific institutions, follow the Potsdam Institute, follow the great Stanford University, follow the great academic and scientific institutions around the world to think about some of these, and they'll lead you to other great places as well. At Rob Gell is a bit more political, and my personal Facebook page is a bit more political as well, about where I really think we should be making our decisions.
And to finish with 1 or 2 things we can do as the average person to contribute in whatever small way to this issue?
Yeah. Look, I think there are a number of things, but I used to get very frustrated with the whole sort of, Rob, not too much doom and gloom, please. Can we sort of think global but act local? And I got very frustrated with that because, hang on, the big issues that are going to face me for the rest of my life and my granddaughter we've got to tackle those as well. But I think we can do things. I was shown a graph last week. It's this sort of thing I mentioned before. I'm not vegan. I'm certainly cutting down the amount of meat I use. I mean, there's another school of thought says, look, if you really want to do something immediate about the climate, stop flying and stop eating meat.
Yep.
Right? But you don't have to go from a carnivore to vegan tomorrow. Just step it down a bit. So if you're eating meat 7 days a week, maybe think about eating meat 4 days a week and find some other good stuff to eat. If you're already only eating 3 days a week, take meat to 1 day a week. If you're a pescatarian eating fish, maybe think about dropping fish. But if you're down to 1 day a week on meat, maybe think about going to pescatarian.
Yep.
Just a step change. Just a step change.
Yep.
And even if you're driving to work 5 days a week, think about just taking the train or the tram 1 day a week. And when you get to, I can actually, that's not too bad. And if I stagger my working hours, I can do this and the train's not too bad. Or maybe think about riding a bike a couple of days a week. It's better for your health, and then you start walking it. So we can make little steps, little progressive steps. Fundamental, your role as a consumer, when you walk through the supermarket, think about what you're buying, and think particularly when you turn down that aisle that's got wall-to-wall, up-to-head height, white plastic bottles full of chemicals. Have a think about where all that stuff goes. Mostly it ends up in the sewage treatment plant. You're either pouring it down your toilet or down your sink or on your floor, which then gets picked up and it gets washed and it ultimately gets in. And where does that plastic go? If you can avoid that aisle, you're starting to make a more significant contribution. But if you can, think about, how do I put out my recycling bin every fortnight rather than every week, or every 3 weeks rather than every fortnight? Or how do I reduce the volume? How do I create less? How do I have a smaller footprint on the planet?
Wise words. Well, Rob, I want to thank you for carving out what turned out to be a fair chunk of your day to be here and make a mention, which I'm sure I'll do in the intro as well, that you are the MC for the World Plumbing Conference coming up. We're in 2019 right now, in September of this year. We're a month or two away from that. So we're going to hear a lot more from you throughout that conference and your ideas on where we're going to end up, what we can do, and I would assume by extension those commercial opportunities, particularly for plumbers and those in the building game, to really do the right thing and maybe profit, I suppose, financially, by some means as well. So thank you very much.
No problem. There's nothing wrong with profit as long as it's directed in the right way. So I encourage all of your listeners to work out how you can make better choices and still make a good profit. Even I'll be very happy if you make more profit. But I'm delighted to have had a chance to speak with you, and I hope what we've had to say has been of use.
Cheers. Thanks, Rob. Hey, everybody. It's Matt again. Thanks for listening. Just a couple of things before you guys clock off. You can get all Trench Talk episodes at xrm.com.au/podcast. You can also sign up for other goodies at the same site. Just plonk your email in there and you are covered. That's X for X-ray, R for Romeo, M for Mike.com.au/podcast. If you really like what I'm bringing you, please head to iTunes, subscribe to this show and leave a review right there. And lastly, if you want to contact me directly, type the @ symbol followed by Mr. Matt Reynolds into your search bar and you'll find all the social links. Goodbye.